I was waiting for a quorum. Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. You were in the Senate Finance Committee. Today is February 6th. We are going to hear 9 bills. I'm just going to ask each of you, the sponsor can have as much time as they need to explain a bill. And then everyone else witnessing has 2 minutes. Please respect the time. And because we would really appreciate that. And we're going to start, I'm going to read the order of the bills today, so you'll know where your bill is being heard. First, we have Senate Bill 13, Senator Jackson. You can come up to the table in the meantime, Senator Jackson, and bring your panel if you have it. Next is Senate Bill 32, Senator Bailey. Then Senate Bill 358, Senate Bill 209, Senate Bill 214, Senate Bill 215, Senate Bill 30, Senate Bill 371, Senate Bill 54. So that's the order of the bills today. So Senator Jackson, when you're ready, you can begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Senate Finance Committee. For the record, Senator Michael Jackson, District 27, on behalf of Senate Bill 13. This legislation is designed to add some clarifying mechanisms to a piece of legislation that I sponsored a couple of years ago with former Chair of Appropriations, Maggie McIntosh, that established the Maryland Pediatric Cancer Fund. With the assistance of advocates here with me today, we have come up with some changes that would clarify the original intent of the establishing legislation to cement the fund as primarily a research entity aimed at researching innovative treatment methods for pediatric cancer. You should have received some amendments, should be in your packets, that would create a commission to coordinate, distribute monies allocated in the fund, and to bring some additional stakeholders to the table that can ensure the aims of the pediatric cancer research are established. I have with me Ms. Hoffman to help us with clarification on the bill. And again, we're just tweaking the original intent of the bill and the amendments. We look for a favorable report from the committee. And I think we also have another guest here as well. So, Madam Chair, with that, I will pass on to my panel and we will stand for questions when we're through.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senators. I'm going to go first. Good afternoon. I'm honored to testify here today. I'm Kurt Siven. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and I've been privileged as a pediatric oncologist to actually see discoveries from my lab become cures for my patients. Can't do that enough times. I'm here today to ask for your support for the proposed amendment for Maryland's Pediatric Cancer Fund Act. First, this amendment clarifies wording to restore the original intent, our original intent, to provide new support exclusively for pediatric cancer research. Research on childhood cancers is woefully underfunded, and there are other mechanisms that pay the much larger costs for pediatric cancer treatment and prevention. Second, this amendment proposes a commission which will do the nitty-gritty and advise the Department of Health on how to choose from among what we anticipate will be terrific grant applications to do this research. As an example, I hope, my own lab researches acute myeloid leukemias, AML. Treatment for children with AML has barely changed over my 45 years as a pediatric oncologist. Only now are we beginning to see the impact of using new targeted drugs that attack a single molecular component that drives the cancer. And these drugs, as they're being introduced, are far less toxic than the broad cancer drugs which we've had for those 45 years. And they work to some extent, but you're going to hear how they're incredibly toxic. As an example, my lab is working now to repurpose the anti-malarial artemisinin. They received a Nobel Prize in 2015 for their impact in malaria, and they have no toxicity. We're trying to develop those drugs for treatment and find targets which will attack with new drugs like that don't cause horrendous toxicity. So thank you for your support of this. I'd also like to urge you personally to advocate to each other and to the executive for reinstatement of funding for this for the upcoming FY25, which has been withdrawn in the moment. Retaining the SACS funding and fixing the wording back to the original will really discover life-saving treatments for our children. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sivan, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Ruth Hoffman. I'm a proud Marylander and the CEO of the American Childhood Cancer Organization, or ACCO. ACCO, which is located in Maryland, has been the leader in establishing federal funding for childhood cancer research since 1970, funding which sadly has failed to meet the research needs of this vulnerable patient population. In 2018, ACCO identified only 11 states that included childhood cancer objectives in their state cancer plans. This was largely based upon cancer screening and prevention strategies to decrease adult cancer deaths. Children did not smoke to cause their cancer, so prevention strategies will not prevent it. Additionally, only 2 states provided funding for childhood cancer research. Yet almost all states appropriated significant funds for adult cancer research. To address this research disparity, ACCO has successfully secured $98.8 million in 7 states, including Maryland, with 5 more states in various stages of passing legislation. But I'm also here as the mother of a daughter who in 1987, at the age of 7, was diagnosed with acute myelogenous leukemia, the type of cancer that Kurt referenced. My daughter was given a 5% probability of reaching her 8th birthday. Fortunately, she became one of the first children to survive a bone marrow transplant. But to do that, she was treated with toxic chemotherapy and total body radiation. Her survival came with a cost. She's endured a secondary cancer, has endocrine dysfunction, lymphedema, and she recently learned that she is officially in heart failure. Just 6 new drugs have been approved by the FDA to treat childhood cancer in the past 30 years, compared to more than 220 new drugs to treat adult cancer. It's been 37 years since my daughter's transplant, and sadly, treatment for childhood AML and most childhood cancers have not changed. Your support of the amendments of Maryland's Pediatric Cancer Fund Act will clarify and operationalize the distribution of the appropriations to address the unique needs of our state's littlest cancer patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hoffman. Do I have any questions for this panel? Thank you. I have no other witnesses, so this ends the bill hearing.
Thank you.
Senate Bill 13. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Bailey, Senate Bill 32. There he is. And do you have anyone on your panel, Senator Bailey? Well, he's forward amendments. Okay, they're both opposites. Senator, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, and also good afternoon to members of the committee. Senator Bailey representing St. Mary's and Calvert County, District 29 for the record. I'm going to talk to you about Senate Bill 32. This would allow Maryland commercial watermen who hold a license from the Potomac River Fisheries Commission to access funds available under the Maryland Watermen's Microloan Program. In 2022, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 826. This established the Maryland's Watermen's Microloan Program in the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Developed Corporation, MARBITCO, to provide loans to qualified commercial fishermen to continue commercial operations in the state. This bill specified that a waterman eligible for the program were required to hold a tidal fish license under Title 4701 of the Natural Resource Article. However, the wording in this bill inadvertently excluded Maryland residents who work on the Potomac River, which is part of the state in its entirety. During the interim, I was contacted by commercial watermen who live in my district who hold only a Potomac River Fisheries Commission license, not a Maryland state license, and wanted to apply for a loan under this program. So if they only fished in the Potomac River, they would only hold a Potomac River fisheries license, even though it's Maryland, because of the Potomac River Compact between the state of Maryland and Virginia. So we have a big estuary that's controlled, even though the Potomac River Fisheries Commission reports to the Department of Natural Resources. There were Maryland watermen who lived in St. Mary's, predominantly in St. Mary's, Charles, and Prince George's County, who would be out there working on the water, and they weren't entitled to the same part of this loan process that existed if they went to work in the Chesapeake Bay or any other area. These watermen do still contribute to Maryland's economy, and we should be able to assist them in the same manner as we do watermen from across the whole state. This Senate Bill 32 is intended to ensure that these individuals have access to the loans by making it every Maryland resident who holds a Potomac River fisheries license eligible in this statute. Marbitco, and working with them, they've submitted 3 amendments to this bill, and I just want you to know that we support their amendments. I respectfully request a favorable report with these amendments on Senate Bill 32. I thank you all for your consideration, and I turn it over to these people.
Thank you, Senator. Who's next?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator Bailey, and Delegate Morgan. My name is Justin Cheseldine Gass. As a member of the Maryland waterman community, I support this bill to expand eligibility to Potomac River Fisheries Commission license holders. The Potomac River Fisheries Commission is the regulatory authority for all fisheries in the mainstream of the tidal Potomac from Washington, D.C. to the Chesapeake Bay. In order to fish this vast stretch of river, which is Maryland water, you need a Potomac River Fisheries Commission license. There is a robust demographic of Maryland watermen that only hold a PRFC license, as this tidal stretch of river traverses the coastline of St. Mary's, Charles, and Prince George's County. These stakeholders are crucial to the contributions made to Maryland's cumulative seafood harvest, for example, placing Maryland as the 2nd largest blue crab producer in the country. These stakeholders have been historically ineligible from applying for the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation's Maryland Watermen's Microloan Program, even though they are Maryland watermen who are reliant on Maryland waters for survival. Expanding eligibility to PRFC license holders could positively impact small business operations by creating a funding resource opportunity which contributes to further industry economic development. I urge this committee to vote in favor of this bill, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be before you again this session. We're pleased to be here in support of Senate Bill 32 with the 3 amendments that Senator Bailey referenced. For the record, my name is Steve McHenry. I am the director of Marbitco. Want to point out that this bill is a result of the Vice Chair's legislation from 2022, wherein the micro loan program was created for the commercial watermen in Maryland. Initially, the limitation on eligibility for the bill is limited to what are called generational watermen. That is a waterman who is defined as earning a majority of their annual income as supported by tax returns from commercial fishing. So we estimate that based on information from DNR that while there are 56 licensed Maryland watermen in Maryland, some fraction of that, perhaps in the neighborhood of 11 to 1,200, might potentially be eligible under the next generation, under the generational waterman category. Now, beginning next year, July 1, 2025, beginner watermen are going to be eligible for this program. So the young watermen coming on will also be eligible if they're not earning a majority of their income from commercial fishing. We put a provision in the 2022 bill specifying that the loans would be between $7,000 and $15,000. One of our amendments is actually going to recommend striking that because we didn't have any idea when the bill was introduced originally how many watermen would be eligible. So we now have a pretty good idea. We had 33 watermen that were eligible that applied in the last fiscal year and another 7 so far this year. So we carried over just about enough funding for 4 loans that we could have funded last year. So the $15,000 limit made sense. We have 3 amendments, which I'll be happy to answer questions about.
Thank you for your testimony. Do I have any questions for this panel? Are we okay with the amendments? We have any?
Waiting on the amendments to be delivered.
Okay, we will be looking at the amendments. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. So that ends this panel and end of the hearing on Senate Bill 32. Senate Bill 358, Senator McCray. And if you have a panel, you may bring up your panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Corey McCray, Senator for the 45th Legislative District. I hope, Madam Chair, that Senate Bill 358 is one of the easier bills that you will do today. Thank you, Senator. But for the most part, it's been worked out from that standpoint. Madam Chair, I got reached out by a constituent that asked a question in reference to the awards that were being made by TEDCO and what does that look like from a diversity standpoint. And when I went to the library, I couldn't easily access that information. I reached out to my CEO, reached out to my board chair and said, hey, this information should be accessible to the public or legislators to some level from that standpoint. They were in total agreement. I believe that they also have this information on their website at that standpoint, but I also recognize that while we are here at this moment, we will not always be here. So we want to make sure that the people that are in our positions, CEO, state senators, from that standpoint, if they have this issue 20 years from now, that it's there. So I just wanted to codify a practice that they've put in place to make sure that we understand the geography, make sure that we understand the diversity, gender, and things of that nature when dollars are being made. I think that there's been a significant uptick in monies that have went to TEDCO in a good way, because they're doing great things with the resources from that standpoint, but we also should be able to understand how that's being resourced across the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Next.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senator McCray, thank you for your leadership and for your support of TEDCO and for myself. My name is Troy Lamel Stovall. I humbly serve as the CEO of TEDCO. And I'm going to repeat what Senator McCray said. He's exactly right. We know how important this is. We've already started publishing this information on our website, both in terms of gender and race, as well as geography that is on our website that's easily accessible. But we recognize we can do more and will do more. And actually, so we're very much in support of this bill. And I do want to just leave you some numbers, if I can, from fiscal 23. From fiscal 23, we had over 300 applications to our investment programs. I know Senator Brady used the word awards, but used the word investments. There are investments that we use for our investments, for our investment programs, which are pre-seed, seed, and our venture fund. And of those 300 applications, more than 50% of those came from an entity started by someone of color, a woman, or from our rural areas. On our investments themselves, we made about 60 investments. Another 60 were looked at in fiscal 24. Of those 60 plus investments, more than 60% of them were awarded to someone of color, women, or from rural areas. Contrast that to the national average. The national average for all of venture capital, 0.3% of all venture capital dollars across the United States went to an entity started by someone of color or women. So we're doing we think we're doing a great job here. And so we want to continue to do that. And obviously we want to make sure that we're being held accountable for that. So thank you for your testimony. Again, we stand in support of this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. That's the end of your panel.
Yes,
Do you
ma'am.
have any questions for this panel? Senator Hayes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator McCray, excellent bill. Probably one of the easiest ones we'll do.
Thank you, sir.
But my question to the CEO, it does say in a fiscal note that expenditures will increase from 50,000 to 75,000, which is a minimum amount, but the testimony here was that, you know, it's something that you guys are already doing. I think it's an awesome opportunity, but where does the increase come from?
Yeah, the most increase is we've got to get some additional licenses for our Salesforce software so we can have more people access it, because we need more folks to be able to get to the data and access it to do it. So it's about the additional licenses that we need for the staff in order to get it done.
Not pins or personnel or
No.
anything. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have one more person signed up, Angel St. Jean. Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is my first time doing this, so I don't know all the thank you, Madam Chairs and all of that I'm supposed to say, so, but I appreciate the opportunity to share my voice. I'm writing to express my enthusiastic support for Senate Bill 358, which requires TechCo to include an option for applicants to provide demographic information. As a Black woman and founder in the technology industry, and specifically a founder who has developed tech to help organizations use data to drive equitable results, I believe that this initiative is a significant step towards fostering equity within Maryland technology ecosystem. I also want to say that I'm a recipient of investments from TechCo, multiple investments. The technology sector has long grappled with issues of underrepresentation, particularly for individuals from marginalized communities. Despite the undeniable talent and innovation that diverse founders bring to the table, there has been a persistent lack of diversity in investment decisions and access to resources. This proposed legislation represents a proactive approach to addressing this disparity. Including an option for demographic information in the investment application process will provide valuable insights into the diversity of applicants seeking and receiving support from TechCo. This data can serve as a foundation for evidence-based policies that promote equitable access to opportunities for entrepreneurs from all backgrounds and will position TechCo as a leader amongst its peers in using data to drive equitable growth. Furthermore, by prohibiting adverse actions against applicants who choose not to disclose this information, the legislation ensures a respectful and inclusive application process. The requirement for the corporation to submit a report to the Governor, Economic Development Commission, and General Assembly is an important mechanism for allowing a range of stakeholders to benefit from the corporation's efforts in supporting diverse entrepreneurs. By collecting and analyzing demographic information, we can better understand the challenges faced by underrepresented founders and implement targeted initiatives to address those challenges. This legislation has the potential to create a more inclusive and thriving technology ecosystem in Maryland, fostering innovation from a diverse range of perspectives. As a tech founder who is deeply invested in the success of the technology community in Maryland, I know that together we can build a more inclusive and equitable future for the technology industry in our state. For these reasons, I urge a favorable report on SB 358. Thank you for your attention to this matter. I look forward to witnessing the positive impact that this legislation will have on our community.
Thank you for your testimony. Do I have any questions for this witness? That ends the hearing for Senate Bill 358. Oh, Senator Hayes, I'm sorry.
Very brief, Madam Chair, because I know we're trying to move on, but this is, Madam St. John is a resident of 40th District. This is our first time testifying before any committee in the General Assembly. She came a couple of weeks ago just to prepare for this, but the technology that she's developed is extraordinary and to be a great service to the state of Maryland. So welcome.
Senator, thank you for that information and your comments. And Angel, thank you for your testimony. You did well. We would have never guessed it was your first time. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 358. And now we will move to Senate Bill 209. And we have Secretary Kevin Anderson with us. And I think you're bringing up Dana Stebbins. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Vital, Vice Chair Klossmeyer, and committee members. A pleasure to be before you. For the record, I'm Kevin Anderson, Secretary of the Department of Commerce, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 209. Joining me is Dana Stebbins, who is Chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission, or MEDC. This bill will add 2 industry-specific seats on the commission, mandating representation for the manufacturing and life sciences industries. As background, the MEDC's mission is to establish economic development policy for the state and support the work of the Department of Commerce to attract and retain businesses and jobs. The commission's members are mostly representatives of the business community, in addition to several ex officio members, including the Secretaries of Commerce and Labor, 2 members of the General Assembly, and the executive directors of TEDCO and MEDCO. We feel that voices from the life sciences and manufacturing industries need to be heard loud and clear as the MEDC advises the state of Maryland on our business climate and develops Commerce's strategic plan. Formally and permanently establishing for these sectors on the commission is the natural way to achieve the goal. There are 4 other provisions in this bill which strike certain duties of the MEDC. One eliminates the requirements that the MEDC incorporate the full strategic plan of the Port of Baltimore into its own strategic plan. The port is, of course, one of Maryland's most critical assets and will always play a role in our strategic planning. But we don't believe the MEDC should be required to graft another agency's plan into its own. Another provision eliminates the requirement that the MEDC seek contributions from the private sector to support economic development programs and tax incentives. Repealing these provisions will bring the statute in line with MEDC's current practices and give the body additional flexibility when developing the state's economic development strategic plan. The third provision eliminates a requirement that Commerce's Office of International Investment and Trade present to the MEDC at least twice a year. No other division of Commerce has such a requirement, and we would prefer our international team to only present to the MEDC when there is a clear need, such as new programs or significant achievements. The final provision repeals a requirement that the Maryland Tourism Development Board present its strategic plan and marketing plans to the Commission, which does not actually have any oversight of the MTDB. Commerce feels this requirement is unnecessary. This legislation will both strengthen and streamline the MEDC, making the MEDC a more effective partner to Maryland and the state's economic development community. We thank you for your consideration of this bill and respectfully request a favorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Would you like to start?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dana Stebbins, and I am the Chair of the Maryland Economic Development Commission. I'm here today to express the support from the Commission for this legislation and to concur with the testimony that's been offered by Secretary Anderson. I'm prepared to take questions, but I don't really think you have any of me, but I'm here if you do. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us to support the Secretary. Do I have any questions from the committee? Senator Klausmeyer?
Yes, I don't have a question, but I just want to say how happy I am that you included manufacturing on this commission. It's such a vital part of our state, and we don't do enough for manufacturing. So I'm so glad that you did.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
isn't that so?
Thank you.
Do I have any other questions? Okay, that's great. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 209. And Mr. Secretary, I think you probably are staying there.
I am. Do I need to get up and sit back again?
No, you're fine. Senate Bill 2.
Exactly.
Senate Bill 214, the Maryland Military Installation Council, and we have Secretary Kevin Anderson and Lisa Swoboda.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Bidle, Vice Chair Klausmeyer, committee members. For the record, I'm Kevin Anderson, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 214. I'm joined by Lisa Swoboda, Senior Director of Commerce's Office of Military and Federal Affairs. Senate Bill 214 adds 3 members to the Maryland Military Installation Council, or the MMIC, which is an advisory panel that reviews opportunities and proposals to develop and expand our military installations, identifies where support may be needed, such as public infrastructure, and generally works to maximize economic benefits for local communities around each installation. Collectively, Maryland's military installations are a major economic driver for the state, with an annual economic impact of more than $61 billion and supporting nearly 390,000 jobs. The MMIC's membership currently includes, but is not limited to, the heads of the civil alliances that support our state's military installations, such as the Army Alliance and the Fort Meade Alliance, members of communities adjacent to installations, representatives from each chamber of the General Assembly, and the Adjutant General of the Maryland National Guard, the Secretaries of Commerce, Transportation, the Environment, Planning, and Veteran Affairs, and several individuals appointed by the governor. I serve as chair and Ms. Swoboda as executive director. Senate Bill 214 adds to the council the Maryland Secretary of Labor, the state superintendent of schools or their designees, and one representative who is the spouse of a service member. The MMIC often makes recommendations on issues that are important to the community, such as workforce development and educational opportunities, and other topics that affect service members and their families. As both Maryland and the Department of Defense increase their focus on workforce development, housing, childcare, and education for military families, adding these three members will ensure that the council can tap into the unique wisdom, expertise, and experience that each individual brings to the table. Governor Moore has declared 2024 the year of military families, and this legislation is a modest part of that effort. It will help us better serve those families and promote greater coordination at the state level and to support the defense communities across Maryland. I respectfully urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 214. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretary. And Lisa, do you want to start?
I'm available to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you. I think these are really significant changes, and we've heard a lot about the spouses of military personnel and their job opportunities in Maryland. So hopefully this will help assist more in that area that we need to work on. I do have one virtual, and it's Mr. Christopher Arnold. So we're going to hear from him. You can stay at the table. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Christopher Arnold here again, representing the United States Department of Defense State Liaison Office, charged with managing state government relations for the Office of the Secretary of Defense on personnel and readiness issues. Thank you for allowing me to address another piece of important legislation, Senate Bill 214, aimed at supporting our service members and their families. It's been my honor to work closely with the MMIC over the last 4 years and my predecessor for 16 years prior. We appreciate their efforts to integrate military stakeholders' perspectives into policy decisions impacting installation readiness and family quality of life, and the work of this committee to make 2024 the year for the military family in Maryland. The benefits of well-informed and inclusive decision-making set a precedent for other states to follow, demonstrating Maryland's leadership in addressing the needs of the military community. The policies reflected in Senate Bill 214 can make every year the year of the military family in Maryland. And as always, as liaison to the Northeast, I stand ready to answer whatever questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Do I have any questions? Senator Reedy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This could be a question for Lisa or maybe for Christopher. I was looking through the fiscal note, and when I first started working in the legislature in 2005 as a lowly staffer in the House of Delegates, and I remember BRAC was the big deal in 05, 06, 07. And I just thought to myself, for some reason, I thought it was an every 10-year process like redistricting, but it's not. So are we expecting another BRAC anytime soon? And we were a big winner in the last round, but I don't know if I've assumed this would help us position ourselves if there was a BRAC, but I'm just curious if that's on the horizon.
So it is a congressionally authorized action to take BRAC, standing for base realignment and closure. We have not had one since 2005. It's the longest period of time that the Department of Defense and Congress has gone without one. There are relocations and basing decisions made without the BRAC process in place. The Department of Defense can decide to relocate a mission or an office within a department for up to a certain number of employees. That has impacted us in the past. But yes, we anticipate that in the future, they will use this in their toolbox to help realign again and shed some real estate. But also we have learned that quality of life plays a big role in basing decisions now as the Department of Defense continues to focus more and more on those quality of life factors. There is the challenge of retention and even attraction within our armed forces. So they're realizing that these factors, such as military spousal employment or education or the easy transfer of one student's records to another, all come into play with retention of the military.
And the MMIC is already working on those issues, but this will just give you some additional
Correct.
tools.
And our next meeting is
resources.
March 11, and we'll be focusing on a lot of the quality of life factors that we have in play here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions? Thank you very much. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 214. Next is Senate Bill 215, Small Minority and Women-Owned Businesses Account. And again, Secretary Anderson. and Darla Garrett will be present for questions.
Thank you. We'll retool quickly. Once again, good afternoon, Chair Vital, Vice Chair Klossmeyer, and committee members. For the record, I'm Kevin Anderson, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce, and I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 215. Joining me is Darla Garrett, Commerce's Director of Accounting and Administration, who can help answer any questions you may have. Senate Bill 215 makes changes to Commerce's Small Minority and Women-Owned Business Account, which is formerly known as our VLT program because it's funded by casino revenues. This proposal will allow our fund managers who provide loans to small businesses across the state to also provide grants of up to $10,000 when issuing a loan. The grants would only be available to businesses who are approved for a new loan through the program. They would not be able to just apply for the grant. We have heard from our fund managers that adding a grant component would help increase demand in the program and offer an even more flexible loan structure for businesses. For example, a business might need $60,000 for equipment or expansion, but only has the cash flow to support a payment for a $50,000 loan. The fund manager could offer the additional $10,000 as a grant so the business can complete its project. The additional grant funds could open the door for other small businesses that need additional low-cost capital to support their needs. And this will give our program and our fund managers an additional tool to support Maryland small businesses, particularly those businesses who are in greatest need of a helping hand from Commerce. Continuing to support small, minority, and women-owned businesses is a top priority for the Department of Commerce and the Moore Miller administration. This is one of the ways that we are working to make sure we leave no one behind. And I do want to note, Commerce has spoken with one of the fund managers regarding a proposed amendment to allow equity investments to remain an eligible use of funds through the program. Commerce views the amendment as friendly and appreciates their perspective that equity investments should continue to be an allowable use should the opportunity to provide them be available in the future. We respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 215. Be ready to answer any questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Ms. Garrett, you're just here to answer questions. Thank you. Do I have any questions for this panel? Senator Hayes.
Mr. Secretary, I hear your testimony and that there's a general agreement. Has there been any language drafted that you all have agreed to with your fund manager to address the issue of equity investment?
Yes, yes, there's language drafted to ensure that the allowable use for equity funds, I think, has been completed. So I think that's been part of the bill. I'm not. Yeah.
So the equity investment piece, that's in the statute. So
Right.
as long as that stays in there, that's not an issue. And then if we have a fund manager who becomes accredited investor, then they could take advantage of making equity investments.
Yeah, and maybe I could follow up with committee counsel, but the new definition doesn't include that. It only has the loan or the grant as an option in the new definition when you define financial assistance. And so I wonder, and now it does, in the bill, it doesn't show that that language has been stricken. And so maybe you're right in that it remains, but it looked like this bill provides for a new definition of what that financial assistance looks like.
We did draft an amendment to put that back in.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so very much.
That's what I said, Doc.
Thank you, Madam
Sorry.
Chair.
It's been drafted.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, yeah.
Do I have any other questions for this panel? We have one more person testifying, Stanley Tucker.
All set. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and distinguished members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony on Senate Bill 215. My name is Stanley Tucker, President of Meridian Management Group, known as MMG. MMG is the fund manager for Maryland Casino Business Investments Fund, one of the 9 fund managers for small, minority, and women-owned businesses in the Department of Commerce. In addition, we manage the Maryland Small Business Development Financing Authority for the Department of Commerce. In total, All professional staff has over 150 years of experience providing financing and specialized training for small minority and women-owned businesses in the state of Maryland. Senate Bill 215 also allows fund managers to provide financial assistance in the form of grants of up to $10,000 in support of small minority and women-owned businesses that receive these loans from any one of the fund managers. MMG is in support of this provision, believing that it will assist in providing much-needed working capital to the recipients of these loans.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for Mr. Tucker? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 215. We're going to go out of order a little bit because Senator Ellis needed to go to another committee to present a bill. So Senator Lamb, are you ready? Senate Bill 371, Maryland Medical Assistance Program, Provider Agencies and Personal Care Aids. Senator Lamb, you have a panel. Mr. Rodwin.
Yeah, we have
Thank
Mr.
you.
Rodwin, others, and Ms. Okay, great. All right, good afternoon, Chair Vital, members of the Senate Finance Committee. I'm Clarence Lamb, Senator District 12. As you can see from the sign-up list here, there's actually a lot of agreement on this issue, both from home health workers and from home health companies. As all of you are aware, home health workers are an essential but underappreciated part of our healthcare workforce. Home health care workers provide important in-home care to seniors as well as to Marylanders with disabilities. These allow Marylanders to stay in their homes and the community instead of living in nursing homes or other facilities. Although they truly provide essential care, home health workers are oftentimes underpaid, which makes it difficult to recruit and retain the number of staff that we need. This bill seeks to take the first steps towards adequate funding for home health by tasking the Department of Labor to collect annual wage data and requiring the Maryland Department of Health to periodically study whether the state's Medicaid reimbursement rates are adequately covering the salary and costs associated with providing home health services. Additionally, if the study finds that we are underfunding home health, the department will be required to develop a reimbursement improvement plan. The fiscal note suggests that this could be a costly bill, but I think there's some important things to kind of bear in mind. MDH was already required to do an initial study back in 2018, so this bill is just requiring them to update the wage and cost data every 2 years. The home health provider agencies are more than willing to provide the department with the data that they need. And additionally, the 2019 budget required the Maryland Department of Health to develop the improvement plan called for in this bill. However, that plan has never actually materialized or been produced. So this bill is just asking the state health department to do what they should already been doing and have committed to in the past. Passing this bill will be an important step towards supporting those workers who help care for our most vulnerable constituents. Thank you for your time. Happy to turn over to other members of the panel.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Rodwin.
Thank you and good afternoon, Madam Chair Vital, Madam Vice Chair Klausmeier. My name is David Rodwin and I lead the Workplace Justice Project at the Public Justice Center. And we're grateful to Senator Lamb for sponsoring this important bill. I think at this point, we all know and appreciate we have a home care workforce crisis in Maryland. What that means in concrete terms is we just don't have nearly enough home care workers to meet our aging state's growing need for them. I just want to read one line from the really outstanding report from the Commission to Study the Healthcare Workforce Crisis in Maryland, which was just released a couple weeks ago. Quote, more complete and accurate data is required to fully examine the workforce shortages and to develop solutions. For home care specifically, the report notes that data about home care workers is limited. So this bill would solve that and take action on the findings and recommendations of that report. It would do that first by requiring that we have this state-funded workforce. Most home care workers in Maryland, their work is funded by Medicaid. Even though it's publicly funded work, we don't know the most basic thing about it, which is how much our workers getting paid. So for those Medicaid-funded workers, it would just require the home care agencies to report back to the state average pay rate, highest pay rate, and lowest pay rate. And those three things are needed to inform the state's rate setting process. The second part of the bill is this regular rate setting analysis that the Department of Health would do. I know the Department of Health has an amendment actually that would completely eliminate the fiscal note, reduce it to zero. And that is basically to do these regular rate studies in conformity with a new CMS rule, which will be released in March or April. And they've committed to doing that. And we're in conversations about how exactly to operationalize that and memorialize it, but we support that and appreciate them working with us on it. And so we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rodwin. Linda Mamani, are you here? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Mamani. I am worker of the National Domestic Worker Alliance. Oh, I'm sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Linda Mamani. I am member of the National Domestic Worker Alliance. For more than 20 years, I have been a K worker. I've stayed in this industry so long, because I like to help others. Tad, I have experience working in the private sector. I made the decision to move on to the public sector because I've heard the wage will be higher working with the agencies. But I realized that it's not true. It's that there it's no benefit either. I am single mother and I have to work to support my daughters. My hope is to be a financial independent and not to rely to anyone for help or like anybody else who has a job with dignity. There is currently a home care crisis where there are not enough home care workers to take care of our increasingly young population and others who needs assistance. People like me who have years of experience providing care don't feel incentivized to the direct care workers because the wages are too low to survive on. Oftentimes, private families pay more than agencies do. This is not fair for the people we take care of or to us. We take care of others as best as we can, and we want to feel taken care of too. I ask to pass the Home Care Workers Employment Act of 2024 so that there is transparency around Medicaid-funded worker wage rates and to lay the groundwork for higher wage for direct care workers in order to solve the crisis, the care crisis. So that worker like me who have other decades experience and take care are attracted to Medicaid funded work, who I have been thinking about my own retirement because I am getting older. These are things I have to think about it. We take care of so many other people's, but who will take care of us? Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Ms. Mamani. So are you an employee of a home care agency or do you work for the state or who do you actually work for?
Right now, I'm looking the job. I'm disemployed. This is the reason. The reason is they pay us some very low payment, which we can survive. So I am today here.
Thank you. Next we have Allison Yonda.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Allison Yunda, and I'm the Maryland lead organizer for the National Domestic Workers Alliance, otherwise known as NDWA. NDWA is a leading voice for the estimated 2.2 million domestic workers who work as direct care workers, nannies, and house cleaners, providing essential care and supportive services to children, aging adults, and family members with disabilities. While we are a national organization, our DMV chapter is a locally operated membership-based organization covering the area of Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, and it's staffed by several local organizers. Over 127,000 residents of Maryland need help with daily activities such as bathing or dressing. In Maryland, the number of older adults was predicted to grow by 75% in the 30-year period from 2015 to 2045. With anticipated separations and growth, research anticipates 37,000 job openings in the state for personal care aides by 2028. Although the number of direct care workers more than doubled from 2.2 million in 2000 to 5.1 million in 2022, the supply of direct care workers will fall shortly of the demand associated with 8.9 million projected job openings from 2022 to 2032. By requiring that home care agencies that receive Medicaid reimbursement report to the Maryland Department of Labor the rates they pay home care workers, Maryland can take action to ensure that workers receive competitive wages, helping attract and retain the workforce Maryland needs. Given that Maryland last did a Medicaid reimbursement rate study for home and community-based services in 2018, this bill is needed more than ever. This bill would allow Maryland to jumpstart improvement of their own processes by requiring rate studies every 2 years, with reports to the Senate Finance Committee and the House of Health and Government Operations Committee. The rate study will involve interviews with key stakeholders and will examine the cost of paying workers at least 50% more than the minimum wage. Despite the increasing demand and essential nature of home care, caregiving work is still not valued. Workers receive extremely low pay, few benefits, and enjoy limited protections. Improving working conditions for home care workers is critical to address staffing shortages and meet the growing demand for this essential work in Maryland. For these reasons, the National Domestic Workers Alliance fully supports SB 371.
Thank you for your testimony. Do I have any questions for this panel? Thank you. Ms. Kaufman, before we get to you, I have 4 more favorables and you're favorable with amendment. So you can stay there. I'm going to call 4 more people.
Panel, that's why I jumped up.
Oh, I don't know what to do. Go ahead. If you're part of the sponsor panel, tell us about your amendment.
And I believe that the amendments were to address some of the concerns raised by the Maryland Department of Health. So for the record, Dana Kaufman, I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Association of Adult Day Services and the Maryland National Capital Home Care Association. And there was some amendments that actually the House and the Senate bill are not identical. So those were also the amendments that we're looking at, which explains my testimony. I do want to make one point clear, though, because we've heard from home care, and the title of the bill is home care, but the bill is actually broader than home care. The reporting of the wages is for the home care agencies, the personal care agencies, but the study that was done in 2018 actually extended to all home and community-based services, which included not only personal care, but also medical adult daycare and some of the waivers. And I don't want that to get lost. The department, in their amendment to strip the study, they have raised issues because there is a federal rule that is pending right now, which would require not only a stakeholder advisory group to be formed, but a rate setting process. In our conversations with them, they are concerned that the study that is in the bill may end up being inconsistent with that process. So we are working with them right now to try to create some synergy between the two. We welcome the opportunity to keep talking with them, but I do just want to point out that it's not only home care that has lower payments by Medicaid, but it is all home and community-based services, and that is an issue that we are going to have to continue to work on. From now until we can create parity between the cost of care and the Medicaid payments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And did you submit amendments?
No, I thought that I apologize. I thought that they were being submitted initially to make the 2 bills consistent with each other, but then there was issues around the bills.
So we'll need to follow up on the amendments. Thank you. Any other questions for this panel? Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And who is this?
Vivian.
Vivian, thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Vivian Boone. For 35 years, I've worked as a home care worker. Wanting to keep your family members at home and safe, caring for the most vulnerable, our seniors, moms, dads, aunts, and uncles, those who are deeply loved by you, now needs to be cared for. And you try so hard to keep their lives as normal as possible. But so many things are changed and are changing fast for them. Their daily activities, slowing down, such as brushing their teeth, getting dressed, preparing meals, changing their sore clothes, or just walking from room to room is a safety issue for some. I'm here today in support of SB 371. If I was not here today, you would not know how much home care workers across Maryland are being paid. This bill will collect most basic data to improve jobs and work for workers across Maryland. how home care workers are being underpaid, undervalued. We are being taken advantage of by agencies. I am being paid $13 an hour. As of maybe 2 weeks ago, it changed to 15. For difficult special need clients, it may be $18 an hour. This pay rate with no benefits, agencies are getting away with unlawful misuse of Medicaid funds. Those dollars that are to be paid to home care workers are not reaching the home care workers. Home care workers are leaving the field for this very reasons. Agencies are using Medicaid funds for their personal gain and pockets. Legislators, you have the power in your hand to lay a sound foundation to create a good, decent jobs for home care workers. We will be those seniors soon. And who will care for us in a few years? Thank you.
Thank you. I ask that question a lot. My daughter tells me she's going to put me in a place. So thank you for your testimony. I'd like to call, do I have any other questions for this panel? No. Thank you all very much. I'm calling now Megan Peters, Lorraine Ericott, and Tammy Bresnahan.
Dear Madam Chair Beidel and members of the Finance Committee, my name is Lorraine Aricad. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. We are the largest healthcare workers union in the nation, representing over 10,000 workers here in Maryland in long-term care facilities and hospitals across the state. 1199 supports SB 371 because we believe the state needs to lay the foundation for collecting and analyzing data for the home care workforce so that we can bolster wages and job quality. 1199 has been at the forefront of navigating a dire staffing crisis of healthcare workers across hospitals and long-term care. We know that the demand for home care is increasing, and in order to meet that need adequately, advocates across the state are asking the state, do we have the data to understand and meet this crisis? Maryland's total cost of care model pushes us to consider how our broken long-term care system impacts our already burdened ER, emergency rooms, and hospital systems. Our system's success hinges on adequate data and attention to the home care workforce. SB 371 sets the groundwork to invest in the long-term care system with fair Medicaid reimbursement rates and higher wages for workers. States have the opportunity and responsibility to improve outcomes for home care workers and the families they serve by ensuring that the home care workforce is supported by family-sustaining wages. 1199 also supports SB 371 as it is part of the recommendations from the Commission to study the healthcare workforce crisis. And we believe that this bill is an important step towards improving data on the healthcare workforce. Because care can't wait, and for the reasons I stated, we request a favorable report on SB 371. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Klausmeier, committee members. My name is Megan Peters. I'm excited to be here today in front of you as the Director of Government Affairs for the Alzheimer's Association. And on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association, we support Senate Bill 371. According to a population-based study released this past summer, Maryland has the highest estimated prevalence of Alzheimer's in the nation among individuals aged 65 and older. Both Baltimore City and Prince George's County ranked in the top 5 jurisdictions. As the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease increases, so does the demand for the workforce involved in caring for their individuals living with this disease. Personal care aides are an essential part of that care ecosystem and assist in the care of our loved ones. However, availability of these aides is expected to decline if no action is taken to address recruitment and retention. We believe this bill will help to address this issue by providing regular data to inform future policy decisions to ensure there are sufficient workers to care for people living with Alzheimer's and other dementia, as well as other vulnerable adults. In closing, we urge a favorable report of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. You're in a different position, so
I am.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Do I have any questions for Lorraine or Megan? No questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 371. Oh, I'm sorry. I have 2 virtual. Forget about those. Audrey Sellers and Christopher Meyer are virtual.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair Beidle, Vice Chair Klausmeier, sponsor Senator Lamb, and committee members for this opportunity to provide testimony on Senate Bill 371. I'm an advocate with Disability Rights Maryland. We're the federally designated protection and advocacy agency in Maryland mandated to advance the civil rights of people with disabilities. DRM works to increase opportunities for Marylanders with disabilities to be integrated in their communities, live independently, and access high-quality, affordable health care. While I am an advocate with Disability Rights Maryland, I'm also a personal care aide providing the Medicaid-funded care that's described in this bill. I work with a friend of mine who has a serious traumatic brain injury, providing him with Medicaid-funded care. We're swiftly approaching the 25th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision in Olmstead, in which the court ruled that the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, prohibits the unnecessary segregation of people with disabilities. Unfortunately, all too often, people with disabilities cannot secure the critical home and community-based services that they need, not just to thrive in the community, but also to survive. Consequently, many people with disabilities find that institutionalization is their only real option due to inadequate workforce infrastructure. Demand for healthcare workers is extremely high, but job quality is low. This results in poor outcomes for people that require care. Senate Bill 371 would require residential service agencies, or RSAs, the term for home care agencies in Maryland, to report to the Maryland Department of Health with respect to personal care aides providing Medicaid-funded care their average, lowest, and highest hourly pay rates. This information is critically important for policymakers to make informed decisions, as it doesn't hurt to have information. Such data will ensure that RSAs are provided with sufficient reimbursement rates and workers are paid enough to keep turnover low while attracting more workers to the field. Disability Rights Maryland's clients have reported significant PCA shortages. One client was stuck in his wheelchair for over 48 hours. I want to highlight that that having home care can be the difference between retaining the ability to walk, doing a home exercise program, or slowly deteriorating away.
Audrey, thank you for your
people that we care about. I hope that you will support Senate Bill 371, and I urge you to submit a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Christopher?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Meyer. I'm a research analyst at the Maryland Center on Economic Policy in support of Senate Bill 371. The members of this committee know a lot about the reasons why Senate Bill 371 is needed. Home care workers form some of the essential care infrastructure that keeps Maryland going. Nonetheless, there's a severe and growing shortage of workers in this industry. The members of this committee know the reason for this shortage, namely low wages that make it an unattractive job. You all know the ways that this harms home care workers, who are overwhelmingly women of color, as well as the ways that it makes Maryland a less attractive place to grow old, which is an issue that members of the General Assembly have been very focused on in recent years. Also, by pushing care responsibilities onto family members, especially women, this workforce shortage depresses workforce participation, which is also an important economic issue that's been on policymakers' minds recently. That's what's known. But there's a great deal that's not known. The fact is that the data landscape for home care is deeply inadequate. That means that policymakers do not have the information that you need to make effective policy. So Senate Bill 371 would build your knowledge base by requiring extremely basic, aggregate information that agencies already have so that the state can set reimbursement rates effectively and make sure that care workers are getting paid a decent wage that will make the industry more attractive. For these reasons, I'm respectfully asking for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Do I have any questions? No questions from the panel. This does end the hearing for Senate Bill 371. Thank you for your testimony. So I see that Senator Carter's here, and we have also joining with us Senator Brooks from EEE. We're going to hear Senate Bill 54, Occupational Licensing and Certification, Criminal History, Prohibited Disclosures, and Predetermination Review Process. So Senator Carter, do you have a panel that you'd like to bring up?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. I'm Senator Jill Carter. I am joined by my panel of experts in this subject, David Morgan, Christopher Dews, and Cam Bridges. I'm going to be very brief. I've submitted written testimony, and so there's no reason for me to talk ad nauseum. I'm going to also ask that my panel be given deference to get in anything they need to get in. I've cautioned them to be brief. This bill is I brought this bill last year, and unfortunately it didn't pass, but it's a very important bill for Maryland. And I'm here to say that if we really want to be serious about decreasing crime, improving public safety, then one of the things that we have to do is we have to give people opportunities once they've paid their debt to society. And we still have an area where we are not doing what we should, and that's occupational licenses. And so this bill would make it easier for people with criminal backgrounds to obtain professional licenses so they can work, feed their family, and earn a decent income. Right now, and I'm sure Mr. Morgan is going to talk more about this, we're one of the worst states in the country in terms of the barriers that we allow our professional boards to put up. And oftentimes the barriers, like the denials of licenses, have nothing to do with the possible criminal conviction that a person has. And so the mechanics of the bill, it requires predetermination so a person doesn't waste their time. It also would potentially waive a fee when someone shows they're indigent for a consideration. And it also clarifies that certain things that are not convictions should not be considered. I'll let them go into more detail. What I believe is that we'd be remiss not to pass this bill. And I do believe there is a lot of opposition from what I've seen. I'm perturbed by it. I'm very perturbed by it because the mentality with which these oppositions are brought are exactly why Maryland has the problem. These agencies need to be more willing to be working to work with possibly hiring people that have blemished backgrounds. If those people are qualified and they've paid their debt. Maryland, many years ago, as we know, ended the death penalty. And we also have people that are allowed to serve sentences. They have parole, they have probation. Once they're out of prison, if they're even in prison, they finish parole, they finish probation. This would require 3 years after that. No longer is this any barrier unless the agency can show that the conviction is somehow related to the license that they are seeking. And so I'm asking the committee to work with me and everyone. If there has to be some amended language, we're open to amended language, but I think that we have to do better with allowing people to work and pay taxes, which is in everybody's best interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carter. The panel can begin.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is David Morgan with Reason Foundation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and esteemed members of the Finance Committee. Maryland's occupational licensing law currently is 5 things that it does that I will commend it for, which is juvenile adjudication, sealed records, direct relationship, individualized consideration, and older offenses. Those are things that it currently does that we think are positives. Ways that we think we could add to it, as Senator Carter said, pre-qualification. Allow a person to know on the front end if they're going to be disqualified, as opposed to getting the train, having the time, energy, effort, and money only to find out that you were going to be disqualified from the beginning. Also, limit arrest only not being something under the purview of licensing bodies. If you were arrested but you weren't convicted, a licensing body cannot consider that. Vague terms such as lack of good moral character, that is really subjective, nebulous, and we think that that's something else that an applicant should not have to withstand. Written notice, if you're denied, give written notice to the applicant and say why. And the final thing we think that would add to it would be notice of rights. Let an applicant know what their rights are as it relates to appeal, rehearing, or reapplication opportunities. We think those are 5 sensible, common sense ways that we can improve the law here in Maryland. 2 things that House Bill 175 would not do: compromise licensing bodies for people with serious offenses. And the second thing it would not do, significantly expand physical notes. Delaware and Ohio recently enacted similar measures, and they did not see this mass increase in terms of physical capacity. Thank you, Madam Chair and esteemed members.
Members of the committee, I'm Christopher Dews, representing the Center for Urban Families, operating out of District 40, specifically working with formerly incarcerated citizens. So I'm just here to kind of add some numbers and some context to the conversation. For the record, Bureau of Justice Statistics released a report 2022 saying that an estimated 25% of working Marylanders have some type of a criminal record that would appear on a routine background check. To be clear, 25% of working Marylanders, 25%, so that's 1 out of every 4, would have something that would appear on a routine background check, which is the reason why this bill is so important. Many of those individuals who are returning home from incarceration, for example, return to where my client, Center for Urban Families, does its best work, and that's in District 40. And so we do our best job to try to help them secure access to employment. And unfortunately, let's just be blunt, 25% of the jobs also, thanks to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they've mentioned need an occupational license. So when we're placing people or trying to help them secure employment or putting them through these apprenticeship programs, they're not even having the opportunity to, once they've been released and trying to secure access to employment, they're not really getting the access to the license that they need to secure the work that they have. So this is, for us, as we always say, it's a crime fighting strategy. We want people to be working. We want people to be paying taxes and to be contributing to themselves, to their families, and to the community. So that's the purpose behind this bill. I just wanted to highlight that according to the Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing, from 2014 to 2018, there were 613,000 license applications received over an 8-year period, and only 0.13%, or 803, had a criminal record. So what that means, just to be very clear, is that of the people who have a record, they're just not applying for the license at all, leaving them without access to the license or employment because they're intimidated to do so. We think this piece of legislation would resolve a lot of those issues for them and help these people secure the employment that they need so they can take care of their families. Urge a favorable report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Cam Bridges, and I'm the Senior Public Policy Advocate for Job Opportunities Task Force, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping low-wage individuals gain access to quality employment. And Chris here took all of my talking points, so I will just briefly share 2 statistics about Maryland and licensing laws. So the Institute of Justice ranks Maryland as the 9th most burdensome licensing laws and 21st based on the number of licenses and the average burden. And in Maryland, almost 60% of all low-income occupations require an occupational license, according to the Institute of Justice. That's over 235 professions that just simply are unavailable to the most at-risk and at-need Marylanders. So JOTF urges a favorable report on this legislation, and we hope that we increase access to job opportunities for our most vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Do I have any questions for this panel? Oh, Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Carter and Mr. Dukes, you already had my attention. You didn't have to call me out a couple of times in the District 40 references, but Senator Carter, it sounds like, so I think the overall intent of the bill makes sense, but I think some of the testimony that's provided by the agencies do raise some red flags. I wonder if you've had an opportunity to talk with them ahead of time. I think what I gather from some of the testimony, some of the processes may be overburdensome. Like, I don't understand why individual applicants, except for those who are experiencing levels of poverty, would pay a fee in order to do a criminal review. That, I think the department raised that concern as a barrier. I think that might be a barrier as well. But I wonder if it was a more narrow scope of things, because, you know, some things that are not non-violent may also compromise an individual, you know, based off of these occupations are in positions of trust, right? Whether it be, you know, a physician or whatever, these are occupations that the community have grown to trust with their information. But if you have a criminal record that displays violating that trust, that might be called into a question. So I wonder if there's a way to have a conversation with the department, narrow the scope of things that might be excluded to make it more applicable to some of the concerns that the agencies have raised.
Thanks for the question, Senator Hayes. So the bill already specifies that a person can be denied, but it would need to be there need to be a correlation between their criminal history and the license for which they seek. That's in the bill. And so, may I, if I may take a quick liberty, I promise to be brief. You know, this bothers me immensely, and we weren't in this committee last year, but last year we had a person who had a licensed electrician who had to work under the table off of the tax rolls because he had 8 years of experience, I believe, and he was denied a license because of his criminal history. This past summer, I represented a young woman who in her, it was about 10 years before she had been married. She was in her 20s, and she had 3 small children, and her husband, and we all know how we are when we're young, much more volatile. Her husband was cheating on her. She went to the woman's house to get her husband. She kind of like broke in the door. And so she had a burglary charge, but she also had an assault charge for entering into the premises. But what's funny is the person that lived in the home quickly got up and pushed my client out of the door with mace, right? So my client was then maced and pushed outside the house. No injury occurred to the person. She was placed on short incarceration. She went to jail. She came out. She did probation, parole. She got divorced, and we went in court for a modification to a probation to try to get a probation before a judgment modification, so that she could get her nursing license, which she already went through the whole process to become a nurse. She was now a single mother with 3 children. We had an affidavit from the victim saying she no longer had an interest in any harm coming to this person, and the person had not been in touch with her. And the judge said, nope, I'm not going to modify to a PBJ so you can get a nursing license. So now you have this woman in her 30s now with 3 older children that she has to raise by herself, unable to get this professional license that she's qualified for and trained for. I'm only saying that to give you an example of how we allow these barriers to really harm people. This woman has been through conflict resolution, anger management, everything you can go through. She's passed with flying colors. It's been 10 years. She's more mature, no threat to the public safety. She would probably make a wonderful nurse, right? But she can't be a nurse. So what's she going to be? You know, something much less with much less money. So again, the bill says that if it's related to the license, they can deny, but they have to explain why. That's all.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think it just might benefit the committee if there was a conversation had with the department. I think part of the testimony that they provided, at least from the Maryland Board of Physicians, that they processed, I think 7,100 cases, 118 had positive results as it relates to criminal activity, but not a single one was denied based off of criminal history. And so there may be a little bit of opportunity to find compromise, at least if the scope was narrowed a little bit. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We definitely want to find compromise because I think this is a very important issue as we move forward in Maryland. We create more expungement mechanisms. We create all these idealistic things to help people with reentry, but we ought to let them get a license to work.
Next, we have a question from Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Carter, maybe for the panel, I just have a question as far as some further clarity on some of the definitions. So I'm just wondering what's the difference between an unreasonable risk to property or to the safety or welfare of specific individuals or the general public versus a direct and substantial threat to public safety or specific individuals or property?
I think it's subject to discretion of an agency.
Okay, but I mean, what you're suggesting is to use the language of direct and substantial threat to public safety. And I guess what are those that are making those decisions?
Oh, I see what you're asking.
Yeah, because that's what I think that's what your bill would do is change it to a direct and substantial threat to public safety or specific individuals versus existing an unreasonable risk to property or to the safety or welfare of specific individuals or the general public. So what's the difference between that and like how does somebody make that decision?
Would like to, but I think it's clear that a direct threat is just different than it's more subjective to say that someone might pose an unreasonable risk. We know what a direct threat is versus somebody might pose an unreasonable risk based on their background, but I'll let anybody else answer. That's just my interpretation. It probably makes it more difficult to deny a person if you can't show that they would pose a direct threat.
I mean, Senator Carter already, that's the direct answer, is that it's far more specific. And when it comes to like, I mean, just, I guess the best way to say it is that it's less ambiguous, my words. It's less ambiguous to say that something is a direct and substantial threat versus an unreasonable risk. It's just more direct. I'm trying to think of
So is it more serious is what you're suggesting that it?
I don't know if I would say it yet. Yes, it would be more serious, but the direct way to put it would be that it would have a correlation with the actual public. So for example, if a person had a trespassing charge, right, you could argue that, well, that's an unreasonable risk to property because they had trespassing, right? But if a person's trying to become, I don't know, an electrician, right, what is having a trespassing charge? How is that a direct and substantial threat to public safety?
Yeah.
There's a better way for me to answer this question, and I do not have the words, but the best way to say it is that there's a difference in level of having to prove something being an unreasonable risk to public safety, I mean, to property or public safety, and something being a direct and substantial threat. So that you are correct, and this is why I think Senator Carter has mentioned multiple times that we are willing to like discuss the language. We just want to be very specific that we don't want individuals being denied for things that are just more amorphous rather than something that's more apparent.
Thank you for that. I guess just the thing I'm wondering if there's those that serve on these boards that have to make that decision, they have to decide like what exactly it does that mean and when they make that decision. So I just, you know, I guess I can probably guess a little bit, but I think it's always helpful for the definitions purposes so that there's like some sort of guidance or what does that mean?
Yeah, and Madam Senator, I will add to it. That's why we think written notice is also really important. That if you're going to deny, you have to put it in writing. You have to be specific because what that allows the applicant to do is say, okay, I know where I stand. I might need to adjust this or fix this. But if I don't have to give written notice, I could just say it's unreasonable risk, then that leaves the applicant in a pretty tough state. So we think the written notice of why I was denied, that's why we think it's so crucial to add to what Maryland currently does.
If I may, Madam Chair, just one more. Thank you, Madam Chair. There's also the qualifier of there's a direct relationship between the applicant's previous conviction and the specific occupational license or certificate being sought. Do you know how that is presently? Because you can imagine if there's a direct relationship, let's say you're in healthcare or something, right. You know, there's a number of things, you know, even if you hold a position of like, you know, that's a public trust, there's lots of things that could say, well, that's a direct relationship. But you know, that you could at least make the argument. And I'm wondering if, you know, if there's some way now that is contemplated like a direct relationship between the two, if you know how that's defined.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying that because Maryland already has in statute in law that there has to be a direct relationship.
Right.
Between the crime and whatever license is being sought. So I feel like I understand that part, but I'm not understanding.
Sure. I guess I'm wondering, like, how does one define direct relationship? You know, because we can make the argument that there are many crimes that I would say, well, I think that's, you know, and for example, like, you know, I'm an attorney and this is different, obviously, because that legal profession is regulated by the judiciary and not through the legislature. But like, is there, and you know, there's lots of crimes for which you'd say, well, you can't get a license to practice law because, you know, that you hold public trust. And I think similarly, like healthcare workers or things like that they, you know, have, and you can make that argument that there is a direct relationship. So I guess, you know, I'm just wondering if there's any way that that's kind of interpreted now.
Okay, I understand better now. Yeah, if you were, let's say it is a nurse, healthcare industry, right? A direct relationship would be, okay, you had a conviction dealing with opioids. That's a direct relationship because you are going to be presumably dealing with that. So that's a direct relationship between the nursing profession and opioids. That would be considered a direct relationship. Or you had some type of fraud conviction and you want to go into the financial industry, some type of financial fraud, and you want to go into the banking industry. That's a direct relationship in which, could be the basis of denial.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator Carter, I know probably expected me to be super, not like the bill or whatever. The truth is, I think there's some points in here that are really reasonable. I mean, I think we have a problem. In this committee, we hear a lot about trouble with our licensing boards, some of them, and we're trying to work to correct those. Some are doing a great job, but we've had some with some challenges. And I think the idea of letting somebody know before they go through a whole process that, hey, you're just not going to be able to do this particular occupation is really fair, and having a fee associated with it because there is some cost to the agency to do it makes sense. And I also like the idea, I don't like the idea of somebody, if you weren't convicted, necessarily losing something. However, it is true if you've been charged 3 times for a crime, it's like, the problem is you're trying to tightly define it and take away the discretion of the boards. I know you're going to say you're not taking away their discretion, but I mean, trying to parse it down to hammer it in is the difficult thing. I don't know. I guess I'm echoing what Senator Hayes said. It'd be great if we could work on maybe some of these items. I think the problem is so this is my question. I wanted to say positive. My one question I'm concerned about is if you get something written back, does that allow for some cause of action to say I was denied unfairly? I don't think so, right? Because these are not at-will employees. These are people.
So I don't believe so, because I think that there's an appeal process and different agencies may do it differently. But I think that, the bill says that if you get that written denial, that it needs to notify you of any and all appeal rights you have, whether you can submit a request for a reconsideration. Maybe you could provide information they didn't have at the time, or if you can take an appeal. And I guess there could be occasions where you have Office of Administrative Hearings appeals, if you think you're unfairly denied. But I don't. So I think that what you're getting at is more what people already have when they are discriminated against. Then they would have a cause of action for discrimination for denial because of, race or national origin.
Which I would assume the state agent, the occupation board would not put in writing, but
you would think.
So I guess that's interesting. And then I would also just say one concern I have I understand the argument about you trespassed 12 years ago. Now you want to be, something has nothing to do with that. At the same time, there are crimes where you might say, or I might say, well, that shouldn't matter if you want to be a nurse just because this happened, or if you want to be an engineer because this happened, or whatever. But that's kind of in the eye of the beholder. So how do we get around taking away that discretion? I mean, I feel like it would need to be a little tighter to figure out how to allow some discretion, even within saying, hey, don't disqualify people just because of a crime.
Yeah, well, so there's many different ways to answer that. And I know you're a veteran of JPR. You've been in plenty of conversations on criminal record expungements. So just to be clear, just because a person secures a license does not mean that they secured employment, right? So there's already the check and balance of when an individual tries to, let's say you go to work for Sinai Hospital or something like that in the nursing license, you still have to go through the regular employment process. Just because you have the license does not mean that the employer is just going to let an individual go scot-free without considering their record as well. That's a whole nother issue. This is the reason why, at least for myself, at least securing a license is that's step one. And so to kind of deny the person the license and then also, potentially deny them the employment in general, there's already steps in place to kind of examine that level of, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's good. I thank you. And Madam Chair, last, I guess, comment, not so much a question, but is that we also, though, we're doing ban the box a lot of places. So that we've said there's certain things you can't do. So I just think the balance is important, but you do make a good point. I mean, the occupational licensing is not actual employment. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was good discussion. I don't see any other questions for this panel. Is Chad Reese here? Was he your original panel? Or Chad, you want to come up? Chad is listed as favorable.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Chad Reese. I'm with the Institute for Justice. For more than 30 years, IJ has represented as a nonprofit public interest law firm and advocacy organization, individuals seeking the right to earn an honest living and a number of other constitutional rights and civil liberties. I've included in my written testimony a number of links and resources based on that 30 years of experience, including a number of research documents that I think will provide some of the numbers. And in fact, some were already cited in the initial panel as well. I won't spend a lot of time reiterating the points that have already been discussed on the sponsor panel or diving into those, although I'm happy to discuss them at greater length if there are questions. One thing I did want to spend a little bit of time on, since it got a little bit less discussion during the previous panel, was the importance of the pre-application opportunity for folks to double check and see if, based on whatever standards exist or end up being adopted by licensing agencies, if their specific set of criminal records or offense records would bar them from pursuing a license. I know there has generally been some pushback from some of the opposition on this, creating perhaps an administrative burden on the licensing boards. But I'd appreciate if the committee would recognize that that cost of uncertainty sort of already exists. But right now we're expecting the entirety of that cost to be borne by the individual with a criminal record, choosing whether or not to pursue education, training, internships, and apprenticeships in a given occupation. And that's not a trivial cost, especially for an individual. That can involve hundreds or thousands of dollars. It can involve years of schooling or lower paid apprenticeships or internships, depending on the specific license being sought. And so to the extent that a licensing board is concerned about additional administrative burden, that seems like the appropriate role for a licensing board to take on. So I know there have been a number of stories shared already about why those individuals may already not have the resources necessary, but I wanted to emphasize that particular point and the importance of that pre-application opportunity.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for this witness? Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Mr. Reese. Just quickly, I noticed on your letter, you said roughly 30% of Americans have criminal records. And I was looking at the information from JOTF, they're saying 25%, and also Center for Urban Family says 25%. So
I can clear that up.
Yeah.
So first of all, the number that I listed, the 25%, is coming from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, but that's specifically for the state of Maryland. The number that he's talking about is nationwide. And I think it was roughly 30, there's like 1 out of every 3 Americans is the number that's nationwide. So we're talking about Maryland is 25%. So we're doing good compared to others. And nationally, it's about 1 in 3.
Okay, thanks.
And it's an estimated number, just so you know.
Okay, thanks. We'll extract the positive.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Senator, if there are no other questions for this panel, thank you very much. We're going to move to Nicholas Framerini, favorable with amendment.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Nicholas Framerini. I am here to represent the Maryland Mortgage Banker and Brokers Association. We support the bill 0054 with amendment. We obviously support the positive intentions for this bill to give Maryland residents a second chance at getting licensure. However, the bill is inconsistent with Maryland Code FI 11605 and also out of alignment with the federal statute of the SAFE Act when it comes to the loan originator license. The General Assembly and Congress have already determined a high standard of qualification for the loan originator license. And for these reasons, we do ask for a favorable committee report, but with an amendment to exclude mortgage loan originator licenses from the bill.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions at all for Mr. Framerini? No. Thank you very much. And we see your request for amendment. It's in file. Thank you. And finally, I have unfavorable Matthew Dudzik and Rhonda Scott.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Matt Dudzik on behalf of the Maryland Board of Physicians. You have my written testimony, but I do want to say that, the board has worked very hard to have a thoughtful process when it comes to processing applications that involve a criminal history. As the Senator mentioned, as Senator Hayes mentioned, we received over 7,100 criminal history record checks last fiscal year. The year before, we received almost 8,000. So it's roughly 15,000 total over the past 2 years. Not a single denial based on reasons of criminal history. That being said, while it is exceedingly rare that we do deny a license, physicians in particular, and physicians and other healthcare providers have a particular place of trust among our communities. To quote Dr. Bob Oshel, who is the former associate director of the National Practitioner Data Bank, patients give medical professionals the most intimate authority over their bodies imaginable. And he cautions that this authority gives them the ability to sexually abuse patients, exploit them or their insurers financially. And he goes on to recommend that medical boards have the broadest possible latitude when making licensure decisions related to prior criminal history. This does not mean that we are looking to deny anybody their license. This does mean that we need to be sure that when we license a physician, we have the ability to thoroughly investigate, and we have the ability to say that we are comfortable that this individual is safe. And in order to do that, we need to be able to properly investigate. The areas of concern with Senate Bill 54 are especially surrounding the areas where certain acts are not considered disclosable. I know I'm short on time, so I can't really go into great detail on that. But some of the things that would not be considered disclosable under the bill are still things that we really need to have a thoughtful investigation of. So based on that, we would urge an unfavorable report.
Can you expound a little bit on the acts that you're concerned about?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. Again, I will say once again that we have had a handful of denials in our entire history since we've begun collecting criminal history record checks. So we're talking about a decade of criminal history record checks. However, of particular concern are many crimes that do not result in imprisonment. So, when we're talking about fraud, especially Medicare fraud in terms of a physician, that is a serious concern that we need to investigate. One particular example would be a few years ago, an applicant had received a sexual abuse conviction in another state. Upon investigation, we found out that he had received this charge while employed in a high school in another state for sexual contact with a student. He had formed a sexual relationship with a student that was under his care. However, his sentence did not include a term of imprisonment. And under this bill, after 3 years, he would not have to disclose that on his application. So again, the board does not go out of its way looking to deny licenses. The board tries to give every single person an opportunity to demonstrate and to appear before the board before we ever consider a denial. We offer notice in writing and so on, but we need to be able to look into it.
For expounding on that, I appreciate it. Any other questions for Mr. Dudzik? Rhonda Scott?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Rhonda Scott, Executive Director for the Maryland Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing concerns mimic those of the Board of Physicians, but I did want to mention that the Board of Nursing also takes this process extremely seriously and has established a process where we're following the law when it comes to considering mitigating factors when we review instances of positive criminal history records check. Considering the totality of the circumstances, the applicant has an opportunity to sit with board members and explain the conviction and give them, the benefit of their story. We collect data from them as far as letters of explanation, recommendations from others, and we do consider that information. But one of the things I really wanted to stress that this bill puts at serious risk is the state of Maryland's participation in the Nurse Licensure Compact. Currently, it is a requirement, one of the 11 uniform requirements to participate for a nurse to be eligible for a compact license is that that nurse has to disclose the participation in any type of alternative to discipline program, which for Maryland is our safe practice program that exists solely to assist practitioners who suffer from substance abuse issues. Failure to disclose that information then puts our public at risk, and it also puts the compact participation at risk. And at a time where, you know, you've heard about workforce shortages, with over 2 million nurses in the United States participating in the compact, that puts Maryland at serious risk for having nurses come across the border to provide critical care to our citizens in Maryland. So for those reasons, the Board of Nursing is urging an unfavorable report.
Ms. Scott, can you tell me, maybe you may not know this because I know you're new to the Board of Nursing as the director, but how many nursing license requests were denied because of a criminal background?
Sure. So in fiscal year 23, we collected about 15,000 or a little over 15,000 criminal background checks. A little over 350 were negative. Were positive, and there was 1 denial out of all of those. And similarly, previous years, it's extremely rare that the board would deny a license solely on the basis of a criminal history records check.
I think I turned it off. Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In a joint written testimony that was submitted, it identified the kind of pre-qualification process as an extra step. But in the testimony that's provided by the sponsor in the panel, this is a way to just let someone know up front so they won't have to go through the expensive and time-consuming process of figuring out that they would be denied anyway. Why is that? Why did you all I guess identify that as a 2-step process? And do you see any benefit in doing a pre-qualification? I'm trying to figure out, like, practically, how is this applied, given the testimony that this is just a way to streamline it. It sounds like what you guys have articulated is just the opposite. I'm trying to understand the difference.
Sure. Thank you for that question. In general, I think that, you know, we don't necessarily have an issue conceptually with the idea of a predetermination. There are some reasons why, as written, we think it may not be appropriate. So for the Board of Physicians in particular, and of course I can't speak for the other boards, but while it's very rare that we deny a license, we often will, when we look at that and consider that criminal history, we might license somebody with conditions, for instance. So if we see a history of drug or alcohol abuse, and unfortunately, you know, physicians do have a higher percentage of likelihood to be victims of or to experience, you know, drug or alcohol abuse, we may include as a condition of licensure that they be referred to the Maryland Physician Rehabilitation Program. That's something that, you know, we worry that if we gave a predetermination that no, your prior DUIs are not going to impact your license, and then when they go and or are not going to prevent you from getting a license, and then a couple of years later when they apply and we say, well, we would like to, you know, refer you to the MPRP for monitoring as a condition of granting your license, that we would no longer have the ability to do so because we granted that determination. We also, we're worried that it could, you know, right now the board is very thoughtful in its process. We do worry that it could have the reverse effect though, which is that, you know, absent the full license application, the board is going to be more likely to be more conservative with who they allow, you know, who they allow or who they give that yes to. Because once they say yes under this predetermination process, they cannot then go back and say no unless there's totally new information. And so, you know, again, it's our primary concern is with the lack of disclosure, not with the predetermination process, but those were some issues that we were.
Similar legislation, and this is my last one, Madam Chair. I'm just trying to get some clarity and maybe we could follow up at another time. But similar legislation like the ban the box legislation is similar in this effect that it takes away the requirement that someone disclose ahead of time, but that information can be brought on. And it's been accomplished by state governments as well as the private sector. I guess it sounds like you're saying that it can be accomplished, but it sounds like you're calling it something different where it's like approved with conditions versus the pre-qualification. So it sounds like between the two differences, there's somewhere that could be met in the middle with further conversation possible.
I certainly hope so. We did have a meeting with Senator Carter prior, and we're happy to continue our discussions after the fact. While we have some issues with, Senate Bill 54 as it's worded now, and we don't necessarily have a perfect solution, we're happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I want to kind of revisit that just a minute with Rhonda Scott. So you said there were about 300 of the nurses in fiscal year 23 of the applicants that had criminal background issue, but only one was denied.
Yes.
And I wonder if you upfront had to say to them, yes or no, if more would have been denied, because you wouldn't have had all the details or the time to really interview them and ask the questions.
Correct. So we, with these cases, when they're denied, again, they have many opportunities to, provide all the information. We rely first on the application for disclosure. We find out many times that folks aren't forthcoming once the results come back and we review them, but we give them an opportunity to provide all the information upfront for the board to review and make a determination based on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And one other thing I did want to mention is that the board, the predetermination piece, I think the bill allows puts that on the department to make the decision. I'm not sure if it specifically means the boards it's themselves, but it would be kind of alter the process if it were the department and not the actual boards making the determination of whether or not the person would qualify for the license.
Thank you. Do I have any other questions for this panel? Thank you both for your testimony.
Thank you.
That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 54, and Senator Ellis is back. So we're going to go back to Senator Ellis's bill, and it's our last one for the day, Senate Bill 30. And Senator Brooks, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chair Bidle and Vice Chair Klausmeyer, members of the Finance Committee, Arthur Ellis, Senator of District 28, here to present a tiny little bill requiring the state to set aside like $600 million to bring manufacturing back to Maryland. Yay. That's all. It's a tiny little amount. And so I'll put an amendment to not require to make it a may, the governor may, and up to under the consideration of financial budget issues. So the thing is, looking back on our lives, right? We think about companies that we use a lot of, Amazon or Google or Facebook, and we remember when those companies came public. How many of you reflect and say, wow, I should have invested? I mean, some of you probably did, but with me and so many others say, I wish I invested in that. Look how those opportunities are just tremendous now. Well, this is an opportunity. This bill is focused on an opportunity that exists currently in this country. While I attended NCSL, National Council of State Legislators Conference in Annapolis last August, I learned of a tremendous foreign direct investments coming to the United States to build manufacturing facilities and green industries. My research since NCSL unearthed additional investments by American companies. All these investments are spurred by the new federal laws, spurred by the Biden administration, like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. A headline in the Wall Street Journal reads, "Small towns chase America's $3 trillion climate goal rush." Let me say again, $3 trillion. That's big money, right? The Inflation Reduction Act demands a leap of faith from communities around the country that are committed to significant local resources in hopes of attracting new industry. So my question was, what is Maryland doing to attract some of these investments to build manufacturing companies, to have these manufacturers in the state, creating great jobs for our citizens, great middle-class jobs? Maryland was once a tremendous state in manufacturing. I mean, we made a lot of things in Maryland. There are now, unfortunately, there are a lot of empty factories all over Maryland, in Baltimore, a lot of empty industrial zones. You go to Western Maryland, like the Luke Paper Mill moved out. I mean, and what are we doing to bring them back when tremendous monies are coming into this country? In addition to Maryland wind energy initiatives, should Maryland compete to land these additional green industries? And if so, what incentives should be legislated? West Virginia, a couple of years ago, passed a $400 million fund for green industries to take advantage of the incentives coming through Washington. And I must say that in Western Maryland, they were trying to bring back, bring some manufacturing in the closed industrial sites that the Luke Paper Mill had. And they were very close to landing these companies. Then West Virginia passed this $400 million incentive fund. And guess where they went? These companies went to West Virginia, and they were making these solar plants in West Virginia, coal state. And so they just left Maryland because West Virginia said, hey, we will help you and we'll attract your company. And they left Maryland dry and high again. In the US, which is offering $369 billion in incentives and funding for clean energy as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, they're seeing a windfall of foreign investments. German automaker BMW just broke ground for a new battery plant in South Carolina. South Korean firm Hyundai and LG announced a $4.3 billion battery plant in Georgia. Panasonic of Japan, on and on, I can go on. I mean, and nowhere did I say any of these investments coming into Maryland. That's because we're doing nothing to attract them. I just want to skip forward. I came back from NCSI, did a lot of research. I did a paper and I passed it around, and from that decided to put this bill in. It's estimated that a total private sector and public spending over the next decade, driven by the Inflation Reduction Act coming out of Washington last couple of years ago, alone range from several hundred billion to about $3 trillion in economic activity. And so the question is, what can we do in Maryland to bring these middle-class jobs back? I mean, this bill is aimed to start that discussion. And I mentioned earlier, my amendments will be to not require word shall, but change the word shall to a may. The governor may allot up to $600 million to bring these foreign investments and tremendous investments into Maryland to revive a lot of our communities which are suffering from a dearth of jobs. We cannot just rely on service industry to provide the good wages our families need. We have the opportunity with tremendous investments from the federal government to compete with states like, yes, West Virginia, Kentucky, South Carolina, to bring in great jobs and to help us meet our green goal, and also to help correct the structural deficit that we have looking forward out 5 years, a structural deficit of $3 billion. If we have these tremendous jobs in Maryland in the next 3 to 5 years, the taxes we collect will be much higher. Folks will be busy working and making good money and going on vacations, and they won't be necessarily looking for a handout or a lot of issues with poverty. So, colleagues, all that said, I wanted to bring 72 witnesses here today, but because of last week's bill hearing with 72 witnesses, I brought just 2 individuals here. And gentleman, Mike here, President of Manufacturers Association, and Ms. Leslie, they'll share their thoughts. So I end with that and ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 30, colleagues.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Finance Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Leslie Felice, and I'm here to express my strong support for Senate Bill 30. This bill is pivotal for Maryland's economic future. It establishes the High Impact Development Project Program, providing financial assistance to industrial development agencies or enterprises undertaking transformative projects. These projects support business growth, create jobs, and enhance our communities. Senate Bill 30 allocates $600 million to the Maryland Economic Development Assistance Fund, ensuring robust support for economic initiatives. Importantly, this bill includes measures that would help prevent misuse of the funds. By investing in high-impact projects, we can catalyze economic growth, foster innovation, and build resilient communities. I urge you to support Senate Bill 30 as it represents a tangible step towards a brighter economic future for Maryland. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Galeazzo, the president of the Regional Manufacturing Institute of Maryland. And yesterday morning, I called Senator Ellis to tell him that I wouldn't be here because I was listening to people that were telling me the idea was too big. And about 2 hours later, I reflected on that and I realized I was being a real hypocrite because I've spent many years coming down here talking to legislators about the importance of Maryland manufacturing, and I just turned down a state senator's offer to support manufacturing. For years, I've been saying we need to think big, act bold with enthusiasm. I was so impressed with what I just heard. It's so refreshing to have a public policy maker tell the truth about the missed opportunities of Maryland manufacturing. We need to think about what he just said. We need to think about the missed opportunity. I think Senate Bill 30 represents a view that manufacturing is important, and it is a big idea. But Maryland needs to rev up its economic engine. I don't have to tell you that we have a lackluster economy. States are out there investing in manufacturing and are doing much better. So it's time to think about making Maryland manufacturing a priority. As many of you know, we know a lot about manufacturing. And by the way, nobody disagrees about the importance of manufacturing, but very few people will come out and say the importance of making it happen. Manufacturing is a wealth-producing industry and an early adopter of advanced technology. Manufacturing creates work, it creates wages, and it creates wealth. And by the way, our governor on national TV talked about the importance of those ingredients for economic development. Governor Moore has indicated we have a lackluster economy. Controller Brooke Lehrman indicated the same thing. This bill is important because it is a step in the right direction. And I'm here today to ask you to consider supporting Senate Bill 30, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for this panel? Senator Hershey first, and then Senator Klossmeyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Michael, thank you for coming because we have worked for many years on trying to attract manufacturing to Maryland, and I know you've led that effort. But I have to go back to some of the things that the senator mentioned. Mentioned 4 states, West Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, and Kentucky. You and I both know that those are all right-to-work states. You knew it was coming. But I mean, when the senator asked, what can we do short of a $600 million piece of legislation, in your mind, would changing Maryland to become a right to work state have a direct impact on attracting manufacturing to Maryland?
Okay, his question directed towards
Mike, please.
Mike, okay.
I think we need to have public policymakers who speak out and make manufacturing a priority. As simple as that. If we have folks that are saying this is an important ingredient to the future of our economy, that we'll begin to develop strategies to make it work. I don't necessarily think it's a right to work issue. I can point to other states that have done well with manufacturing. It's simply, you need to believe that it's important enough that you garner your resources, and make it happen. I don't do sports analogies that much, but the reality is when we said we wanted a football team, we got together, made it happen. And that's what I'm saying. Make manufacturing a priority. Let's first agree that it's shameful. If I had time to tell you how far behind we are with other states, it's shameful that a state like Maryland, that I love, you all love so much, hasn't lifted up the hood and looked under and said, oh my goodness, what a missed opportunity. And Senator Ellis just talked about it. And that's what I'm saying. It's important that we all have a shared vision.
And could I just add really quick, if you look at companies and countries that are invested in this country, they're highly unionized country, like Germany. I mean, very highly unionized EU country. I mean, they have strong worker unions there, but they're not chasing policy, they're chasing money. And the money is available up to $3 trillion to bring these jobs in. So it's not necessarily policy people going after. This bill is not a policy based as far as unions and right to work. It's about the investments that are possible because of the incentives coming out of Washington, D.C.
Well, Senator, I'd have to disagree. As someone who has been involved in my profession of trying to attract businesses to Maryland and trying to place businesses in Maryland, they very much do look at the policies of our state. It's not just all about incentives. It's about policies and being a right to work state. It's about our corporate tax rates. It's about personal tax rates. There's so much more than just waving some money out there and saying, hey, here's how much we'll give you if you come to Maryland. That is attractive when it's a close call. But these businesses that you've talked about, that we've worked with BMW and the solar builder in West Virginia, all went there because of the policies that are being created as well too. So Mike, I agree that we have to take a broader look at these things, but in my opinion, it's a lot more than putting together one bill that has money to hand out. It's about our overall policies, and I think that's where we failed in Maryland. Thank you.
If I may, I do agree with that we need to have the right strategy, which would be a combination of new initiatives to get us to where we want to be. I'm just here to say it's a missed opportunity. And if you look at me, I don't have that many more years to come here and say that. So I'm the enthusiastic piece of this argument.
Thank you. And Senator Klausmeyer.
Yeah, I know. Hey, Mike, you were always talking about manufacturing, like, or industry 4.0. Can you expand on that a little bit? Just a little. I mean, you know.
The future of manufacturing is technology and talent. There's no question about it. We're in a period of enormous transformation, and quite bluntly, most people aren't understanding the impact of that. Industry 4.0 is not new. It's the World Economic Forum 10 years ago talked about it. It's the transformation based on the digitization that's going on and material sciences. So when you think of manufacturing, and it's hard if you're not familiar with manufacturing, don't think about what was. Think about what is and will be. And it's very high tech. So Industry 4.0 is the fourth industrial revolution. We've been successful, and I give the credit in passing bills to help manufacturers, get Industry 4.0 technology. But it's all about, I guess the simplest way to put it, if you have a cell phone and you know how much it's changed over the last 10 years, there's a whole host of technologies that are supercharging. And the most important thing to remember, it allows us to compete with the Chinese. Okay, technology allows us to take back what we've lost. So it's very important that any strategy include the focus on technologies like AI, which is extremely important. I know, Kathy, that was long-winded, but it's hard to say.
And I just have one other question. We all did our heads last year. Did we do our heads last year or the year before?
We did
get 'em?
heads of legislators last year demonstrating the digital technology of scanning and 3D printing. And by now everybody should have received their heads.
I don't know. I don't know that I did. Maybe
I don't know that you came in this year.
I did.
But you know what? I'll tell you what, while we're here, I'm going to invite you to come over to Direct Dimension, and we're going to do a full body scan, color scan. How's that?
You all heard that one. But no, and I appreciate you talking about the 0.4, 0.4, 4.0. And just one more thing. I know we're ready to get out, but in 1 minute or less, just talk about the center you're looking at and we've talked about.
I think Maryland would benefit if we had a Center for the Future of Maryland Manufacturing that would deploy AI to do a better job of connecting. Manufacturers have a lot of unmet needs, and AI and a center that focus on data and connections through broadband. Using AI, we could do an extraordinary job of reducing the cost of serving our industry and other industries. And so we need a center that would depend on artificial intelligence and also training and education that becomes more virtual.
Okay. And if anybody has any other questions, Michael can answer anything about manufacturing.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Thank
Are there any other questions? That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 30 and ends our hearings for today. Thank you, members.